So first, this country is Professor Bae Hyun from the Seoul University, and yeah. Okay, so Professor Bae Hyun, you
yes.
ready? Okay.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Councillor Nabyl, if I may call you like that. My name is Ki-hyun Bae. I am based at the Institute for East Asian Studies at Seoul University. Thank you very much. It has helped me, your presentation has helped me to see the comprehensive picture of Indonesia and Korea relations and ASEAN and Korea's new diplomacy schemes and related core issues of diplomacy around Southeast Asia and East Asia. And I believe that other audience must feel the same. When I was invited to discuss your presentation and receive your material, I was happy to see that we are able to discuss this particular issues on Indonesia-Korea relations, ASEAN-Korea relations, regional order, and so on in this kind of public settings. In Korea, the importance of Indonesia and ASEAN countries as trading partners and the important region of opportunities for business investment that has already been highlighted quite often. And I believe that the level of public awareness as well as business awareness of this is quite higher than ever. However, what we Koreans have not paid much attention to when it comes to Indonesia and ASEAN is that ASEAN has been recognized as one of the major diplomatic actors that play a critical role in shaping and running regional governance of its own. And I myself call it as ASEAN's role as a regional order manager. This concept, I believe, could help us have a different perspective about international politics, which, according to many people's previous understanding, conventional understandings, and I personally think it's a misunderstanding, which tends to be mostly about bigger powers. International politics should be about bigger powers such as China, US, or Europe, who govern the global and regional affairs. In one of my published articles, I tried to identify the role of ASEAN using this concept of regional order management, or regional order manager, and try to specify the two distinct characteristics of that. And I want to briefly talk about these first and associate these observations of mine with your presentation about ASEAN and Korea's version of Indo-Pacific strategy. The first point that I found unique and distinctive about ASEAN's version of Indo-Pacific is its clear signal that ASEAN is willing to make reassurance as a major principle of regional governance in this time of, so-called power transition. And I want to call it as the ASEAN's making of sub-regional space for reassurance. I just label that like that. The ASEAN version of Indo-Pacific highlights that the region should be developed in a non-exclusive way, and that ASEAN welcomes China's growth for collective regional prosperity. In this process, as everybody here can guess, the ASEAN-led arrangements are quite conducive to achieving this goal in terms of their institutional design. Specifically, the flexibility of these arrangements, ASEAN-led arrangements such as ASEAN Way, and informal space of diplomacy they opened up, that can better address changes in power distribution than any other more formal arrangements that we often see in the West-driven multilateralism. Though these institutional features have sometimes been criticized as a core drawback for ASEAN's own development, but they have been considered useful, at least, for managing transition in the East Asian security and political order. And the second point that makes ASEAN's approach distinctively important, I think, is that the ASEAN's version of Indo-Pacific highlights its willingness to create a sub-regional space for smaller and middle players' voices. We can see that ASEAN has been committed to building space where smaller and middle powers can negotiate with bigger powers about regionally accepted rules and principles instead of giving prior authority to already established globally diffused set of rules. Again, taking advantage of the ASEAN and related mechanisms, Southeast Asian countries seem to want to take Indo-Pacific as a construct which, quote, encourages and authorizes local autonomy, unquote. I just got this quote from one report that I read from that's written by the European Union. So these two characteristics that I found interesting and worthy of more attention from international audience, these are something we can also think about when it comes to more, robust partnership between ASEAN and Korea from now on. It is because these persistent characteristics of ASEAN's diplomatic role makes us think about their compatibility, the ASEAN's compatibility with those of Korea's own version of Indo-Pacific that came out last year. The Korea's version has just emerged, and its details have been still in the process of making, I think. So we need more time to look. However, as Korean citizen and a longtime observer of this issue, I am wondering how the Korea's new Indo-Pacific has been perceived by the ASEAN side. The Korean version of Indo-Pacific highlights inclusivity, like you mentioned already, openness and regional stability, which of course are all noted, respected, and promoted by the ASEAN side for a long time. However, what's new this time would be Korea's more explicit self-identification as a global pivotal state, which major global powers can work together to stabilize and maintain the existing order. And Korea's more explicit commitment to the values and norms of the current global governance is also something we can note as an important change from the past. And this more explicit status quo orientation of Korea, it is not a surprising position for traditional middle powers, of course, but it is at the same time not a position without cost, I think, especially when we all see the growing influence of China and China's own vision for new order, which can go beyond the current global governance, such as its global development initiative and global security initiative that Councillor Nabyl just mentioned in the presentation. And consensus tells us that the Chinese leadership is unlikely to initiate a premature contest with the US in the near future. However, this prospect does not necessarily mean that China will want to accept the existing international institutions and norms purely, and it's like somewhat secondary role for the longer term. And if there's more endeavor and willingness from among others to go distant from China's regional and global leadership, China may become more concerned about how it would harm, these others' activities would harm China's key interest in making China richer and extending its power in the region. So all in all, this could raise political and diplomatic tensions between Korea and China. to a certain extent. So I want to ask about Councillor Nabyl's opinion related to these issues. So first, since Korea wants to strengthen partnership with Indonesia and ASEAN based on this new Korean version of Indo-Pacific, what are the differences and divergence that Indonesian government and other ASEAN governments see in this new Korea's new approach? There's of course things in common, like you mentioned, and also there seems to be some distinct differences between emerging differences between ASEAN and Korea in their thoughts about regional order and management. And Korea is seeking for more political and security cooperation with ASEAN through KASI nowadays. And how do you think we can address these divergence or differences together? Also, as a leading member of ASEAN, the Indonesian government may have its own take on the growing partnership with Koreans at the ASEAN level. And also maybe many other ASEAN countries want to prioritize economic partnership with Korea instead of extending the scope of cooperation beyond that, like just putting security issues and political issues in the basket, because highlighting all these political and security stuff with Korea may unexpectedly uncover or highlight the different approaches to different approaches to regional order management between the two sides, between Korea and ASEAN. Secondly, you, Councillor Nabyl, briefly mentioned China's GDI growth, GDI and Global Development Initiative and GSI, Global Security Initiative, and India's initiative for global and regional governance, such as SAGAR, right? Security and Growth for All in the region. I also want to see the Indonesian government's take on these alternative ideas and initiatives, or ASEAN's position to these new initiatives at the collective level. In Korea, there is so much, maybe too much discussion about Indo-Pacific strategies of major countries around the world already, in line with the new foreign policy scheme of the new Yoon Suk-yeol administration. However, China's new initiatives, such as GDI, GSI, and those of India are so far, in my understanding, rarely discussed in public or received not much attention from scholars of East Asia either. So I want to see Indonesia or ASEAN's views on these emerging initiatives that could affect regional governance around Southeast Asia as well. And lastly, ASEAN wants to set up a concrete list of things to operationalize its core principles of Indo-Pacific strategy. That's what I got from, all these readings. And I also want to ask how the progress has been in terms of specifying the things to do list within ASEAN, and what are the examples of things that are prioritized at the ASEAN level this year or in the near future. And there was this 4 priority areas, if I remember correctly, that ASEAN leaders declared to focus on. That was the declaration was last year, I think. Is there anything out of this that's already kickstarted, some concrete stuff, or is there any change in this priority list now, which I may not be aware of? So I would greatly appreciate it if you can give us some updates on this. So again, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bay.
So, who's going to answer directly or the after the?
It's better right away. Okay. First, thank you so much, Professor Bay, for your observation. You offered some questions as well that you want me to highlight as well on several opinions on ASEAN's roles and opinions on the ROK strategy on Indo-Pacific, as well as on China's GDI and how it is perceived in Indonesia and ASEAN. Well, first, perhaps I can start with the one that you mentioned on ASEAN. You earlier highlighted how ASEAN has been labeled by you as a manager of the regional order. I think if we go back to the creation of ASEAN in 1967, you know, the idea of creating ASEAN at that time in the context of the Cold War, it didn't really specify in at least in its creation about the political cooperation. The idea was mostly on economic cooperation in the beginning, but of course this evolved over time with the addition of new members, with the change of the Cold War into post-Cold War era. There are some confidence in ASEAN as well, and the need to be more relevant with the context at that time. So one thing that I also want to highlight is that not only the countries outside ASEAN that might be benefiting from ASEAN, but also members of ASEAN. They can utilize their membership in ASEAN in having a better cooperation with partners of ASEAN as a group. For example, Indonesia, as you may recall, Indonesia has frozen its diplomatic relations with China. I remember from 1960s to 1991, and then within ASEAN, we developed closer cooperation in ASEAN, and once ASEAN and China has started ASEAN +1 with China, and Indonesia cooperation with China, also you can see there is a similar growth of cooperation. And then also other countries in ASEAN, if you see there are comfort zone is getting better, you know, in cooperation with China at that time because of what ASEAN is doing with China at that time. So what I want to emphasize here is that ASEAN also gives benefit to its member in exercising cooperation with countries other than. So the terms you mentioned about regional order manager, I think it's something that can be considered, and it's quite unique actually that if you see the difference with the other regional organization in Europe, for example, the role that ASEAN has is quite unique. And you asked me also about the opinion, my opinion on the strategy that Korea has now. How Indonesia see this. Well, I just want to address this topic together with the question number 3, which is related to GDI. So normally, when a country wants to come up with a new initiative, you know what they did initially before they announce it? They share the idea first. So they want to test the water. What is your opinion if we do this, if we do this, if we want to announce this, do you have any idea? So that's what Korea already did last year before it was announced. You already approached other countries, I think key countries, maybe not all, but this is the way we are doing. Every country does the same. If you want to come up with a new idea before you officially announce as a surprise, you didn't do it like that because you didn't give room for inputs. So I think because Korea already did that, you did that initially, and we reflect on what is similar, what is, and then my understanding is that there is a sense of continuity with New Southern policy. There is a similar red line. If you compare, there are similar red line, not red line, but yeah, similar tone, only in more updated. And also, we were consulted in the process of coming up with the strategy. Indonesia was consulted. I believe you did the same. I mean, not you, but Korea also did the same with other countries. So it's very reassuring. Same thing with China. Why I think GDI is not too popular, or maybe not very. I don't mean to say not popular, but not very known in your team, because GDI was announced in the UN. It's not New York based. So in my case, the GDI initiative from China is something that China offered through the global level, not through bilateral or regional level. So perhaps other team that is more dealing with this can be more familiar with that. But the idea is the same. Before GDI was announced, China also already shared the idea, the concept, and wants to get opinion and who wants to be part of it since the launching, who wants to join later after it's a launch. It has political difference, right? If you join since the launching, and if you join on board later, it's the same, but it's not the same. If you are since the beginning, it means you are more involved since the creation. So you are giving your ideas as well. You can change the terms that they are using sometimes, or you want to give more priority according to your own interest in this kind of strategy and initiative. So that's what my opinion is. And with regard to the priority list in ASEAN, I think this year is a good opportunity to see how it's being follow up, because I'm not in charge of the ASEAN desk, so I don't really know the detail day by day. But of course, since Indonesia is now the chair of ASEAN, I'm sure I need to go back to check about what's the progress that has been made. But something that I can assure you is that there is always a checking mechanism. At least in a bilateral context, we do that. We have evaluation from a certain period of time to make sure if there is a problem in one field of cooperation, that we know how to address it. If we cannot solve it right now, we'll get back to that later. But at least we want to do the same for cooperation under ASEAN. What else? Do I miss anything? But I think that's overall my response to your observation, and thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, Professor Baek Hee-hyun. Now we're gonna invite the second discussant, Professor Lee Chung-yeol from the Korea University.
Thank you for my invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Councillor Vahd Nabyl A is a good presentation. I can have some information about maybe foreign policies on Indonesia's, futures of these Korea's relationship and etc. I'd like to say something. I mean, it's just my opinions, few opinions. At the same time, I have a few questions to say. I'm an economist, so that I like to focus on the economics. But however, I was working in South Asian countries quite a long time. I like something on what we feel about recent changes on environment of international orders and related with Korea and maybe South Asian countries, including Indonesia. And a lot of people say that there's a big changes happen in political and economic environment and orders, say, for example, like Russia-Ukraine war recently, and Chinese rises, and Taiwanese straight conflict, and blah, blah, blah. From my experiences there, living a long time for this, or observe this relationship for quite a long time, say that this may be a big shot for this region. However, it's not a bigger shot. I mean, relatively, it's very big one, but its absolute size, it is not here. Maybe you say something on the origin of ASEAN in 1960s. If you're looking at historically looking at from the around post-war period after 1960s, you may say that Indonesia was far more affected by other things. For example, like the 60s and 80s, always there was a civil war in South Asian countries. In 1950s, Korea was a civil war, a Korean war here. And also 1997 and 8, we have economic crisis. And in Indonesia, for example, like national protest is coming here. So that maybe we have a very peaceful and progressive countries is maybe about 20 years. But before that, it was not here. When you compare with today's big changes with maybe peaceful, stable period of maybe after year 2000, we may say it's a big shock. However, if you compare with today's shock with before the 20th centuries, or late 20th centuries, is like a small one. So I would say it's like we driving a car about like 100 kilometers at the highway. But before that, we have drive over 50 kilometers. Yes, we have a new highway, so we drive 100 kilometers. Yes. Then we go to the local way, then we drive 70 kilometers. Yes. May say that we have to think about, oh, what is the 70 kilometers, high or low? Compared with before we having a maybe highway, then we may have 50 kilometers. Then it's a faster one. But if you're doing a big highway, it's a slow one here. So I think that today recent changes is between this before year 2000 and after 2000, it's also middle here. At the full time is the important one is that we say the big changes happen, say Russia and Ukraine war, we are far away here. And cases, so that relatively Indonesia is a smaller shock than Korea here. Korea is always focusing on the Korean Peninsula. So if something's going on in Korea, stability of the Korean Peninsula, then everything was forget, then we have to focus it. Because, it's just, from Seoul cases, it's just 70 kilometers away, there's a North Korea always threat. Nuclear, bombs and other missiles, everything here. There, what I'm trying to say is that what you feel about recent changes of political economic environment of the world changes is that it has more impact to the Korea rather than Indonesia. So what you feel is quite different from what Korea feel here. That's what I'm talking here. So the Indonesian say this, you say that there's a big changes, blah, 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 a lot of things. But Korean says it's a bigger changes happen here because, recent changes have a big impact on the stability or security of the Korean Peninsula. At the same time, we are Korean government is more pro-conservative government, which is focusing on these more values or human rights and than the previous one here. So the Korean security financial policy is far more important to the Korea than any other issues that here. It may impact on the relationship between Korea and Indonesia and Korea and other South Asian countries. So we have to have less focus on these South Asian issues and recent days is here. So I think that may not be difficult for those South Asian people to understand. As South Asian people say that, okay, for maybe a previous government say that maybe said, oh, we have such as this new southern policies, and Korea was very active to cooperate with South Asian countries. However, the new government recent changes that Korea is relatively very slow to move on here. That's because the important reason that Korean side is we have to always focus on the stability or security of the Korean Peninsula. So that is the more issues. Therefore, when the South Asian country people try to understand the Korea's foreign policies, you have to say that what is the priority of the Korea's policies there. The security is and also when you're talking with the Taiwanese treaty, the South Chinese expansion, all of things, it's related. We are very friendly with China. However, and economically we may be very friendly. However, when you're talking to the issue of North Korea, then we may have a different opinion from Korea's opinion and Chinese opinion and US opinion such as this. So that is the big, I said this constraint what the Korean has. But unfortunately, Indonesia didn't have such a thing, so that you may South Asian people have very difficult to understand. So that I like, so that by this issue, as long as that can be an issue, the cooperation between Korea and South Asian countries may be limited or very functional. That's my opinion here. Okay, that's my opinion. You have to keep in mind. And other things about my questions here about Indonesia here. And first thing is that why the ASEAN, China and India was the bride. People say the bride is a good cooperation partner, and say that there are two reasons. Is that these are the big country and has a big market. That's for the UN side. So that whenever any country is to make something, they can sell it to the China and India. So that it's good thing here. At the same time here, people think that China and India has a bigger production capacity. The biggest production capacity in the world here. So that from the supply side, if you can cooperate with them, you can utilize their resources. That's the most important reason why you have to compare with the China and India. And looking at the South Asian countries, and particularly Indonesia, said Indonesia is a big country, but relatively smaller than China and India. We all know that here. And also the big one is that Indonesia's big advantage is a good resource supplier. Indonesia has oil and gas and maybe timbers, a lot of things of resources, and also skilled minerals such as this. So thing is that what is the, I mean, for to have a sustainable growth for the Indonesia, what is the thing Indonesia has to focus? I mean, from the demand side is relatively good. We have very good thing. Maybe Korean can have a good cooperation here, but we are relatively focused on this the supply side. If you have Indonesia is able to use a good production capacity and facility here, Korea is willing to cooperate with them. We have more than 280 million people there, and you have natural resources, and you have lots of young people. That is a thing you can emphasize to cooperate with Korea, and Korea as a technology cooperate together here. So that this is a good future from the Indonesian side is, and what is Indonesia's strategy to utilize those resources which Korea needs. And also that is I think that is an important strategy to overcoming so-called middle-income trap for use cases here. So that's the first question. Second question is that we know that to have a middle-income trap, overcome the middle-income trap is that we all know that the country must, upgrade the industrial structures. Yes. For example, like resource-oriented in the economy to the more manufacturing or technology or service industry, a service-oriented industry here. What kind of maybe strategy you do have? I know that you are not economist, but you have some kind of broad idea what the Indonesia can do here. And so that question includes what the Indonesia asks Korean government and Korean business sector to do for Indonesia here. I mean, if you have a cooperation, then both sides have an advantage here. Both sides have a benefit here. Korea have a clear advantages and benefit if Korea has cooperated with Indonesia. I mean, as I told you, you have resources, you have very young people here, and what Indonesia asks Korea to do here, and also what Korea can do here. The other question is a very functional one here. Koreans are very, very interested in the moving your new capital. And also if you move to if you install, build a new capital, it is not a capital of the 20th century or before here. It must be, we call it 21st century. Some people call it smart city, and maybe AI, including AI and big data and analysis such as this here. And we know that Indonesia is going to build such a thing. And I'm not quite sure about what is the cost and benefit of thing. If the cost is bigger than benefit to building a new capital here, then it's a loss of your country. If the cost is less than the benefit, I mean, there must be some productivity gain here. It is, you may lose, you may win the game here. You may have a gain. You may upgrade your industry, and you can do more things here. So we know the cost. How much does it cost to make a cities and some places? But we don't know the benefit here. From the Indonesian side is, what is a benefit for the moving capital, and in particular in the productivity gains is here. Many cases, as the case of the moving the capital, for example, Korea, say Malaysian cases, maybe Nigeria cases, many cases that if they move the capital here, for the short time here, loss is, the cost is bigger than benefit. That's true. But in the longer term, maybe different here. So what is your opinion and strategy for moving such as things here? Okay, these are the questions I like to ask. Okay, thank you for your good presentation. I'm looking forward to your good answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for your observation and very deep questions regarding the circumstances in Indonesia, ASEAN, as well as in bilateral relations. I really like the way you put the example of how standard is changing over time. In the past, certain speed considered fast, and now it's considered slow. Of course, the terms of standard keeps changing according to the technology and what we are seeing in common day to day. So we cannot assess what is fast now based on the standard in the past, right? Because I think if you're familiar with Bob Dylan songs, the time is changing. Present now will be later last, and so on. So it's right. So, but if you compare about the importance of issue of ASEAN cooperation with the priority of Korea's foreign policy, I think I'm not in a position to assess and to conclude which one is more priority for you. Of course, I think existential threat and so on is very important. But I can sense how important the issue of Korean Peninsula is based on the experience. I was at the LO of the president last December, as I mentioned. And when the president has to cut short their visit in Bali due to the launch of rockets in North. So I think that illustrates how it's really a priority for South Korea to be here for the president. So he had to come back that night. So I just want to highlight that it's really, I can sense that's important. But the way we see the importance of Southeast Asia, I think from the perspective of South Korea, perhaps it's not just in a matter of security aspect, but also for the continuity of its economic development. Because we know we cannot just rely or separate the issue between political security, war with the other aspect of economic continuity. I know that why, as I initially mentioned, the diplomatic relations started in 1973 because the priority in Indonesia at that time wants to prioritize economic cooperation. We put aside ideological differences at that time, which was the highlight during the President Sukarno time. I think it was more prominent, but President Suharto, from the Indonesian perspective, wanted to catch up in economic terms for development of Indonesia. So I think similar interests happen also here in South Korea in identifying Southeast Asia as a alternative source of source, and I think that happened quite well until now, even though the depth and the wide aspect of the economic cooperation can be different from time to time according to the technology that South Korea is developing and how it's easy to be invested in the region, in Vietnam, in Indonesia. But at least Southeast Asia remains as a, in my reading from the strategy, I think it's still important for securing that, because South Korea is a big trading country, right? It needs a lot of resources as well that need to be provided from outside. And not just that, we have seen also how when the crisis urea for industry was limited in South Korea from China, it was banned, export ban. We tried to get it from other places, and I think Southeast Asia was one of the key providers for that, at least temporarily, until there is another source to continuation for industry in South Korea. So of course there is always up and down. Which one is priority at this time? It's not something constant and permanent, but it's good to have options. It's also always good to have options that can be relied on, and understanding that we are assisting each other, because there is need for both sides to make sure it's not going to our partner is not going to be in a difficult situation, because if that happens, the impact can be felt also by us. So that's why I think the mutual beneficial cooperation in Korea and Southeast Asia is important. I think that is my comment. And with regard to the if you are comparing what do we do, what do we want from Korea regarding the cooperation for the future, you're right, I'm not economist, but I think what we need is to make sure that Indonesia in its future economic development can carry can continue its carrying capacity, because we have an increase of demography, and our economic capacity is limited. In the future, we will have degradation of, for example, there will be an increase of pollution, an increase of carbon and land for productive agriculture, while the capacity of productivity needs to be accelerated. So what we really need is a cooperation that can help Indonesia continue its economy in a green way, because that is something that can help Indonesia continue to grow economically without sacrificing the environment and the future of the future generation. Because right now, if you see, there are a lot of initiatives of cooperation globally, for example, through Paris Agreement or the COP, the one in Glasgow as well. I think we need to bear in mind whenever there is an initiative for cooperation, if we want to make it beneficial for the long term, we have to consider that it's not just for economic benefit, but also for environment and also for social as well. And these three aspects can really help because internally in Indonesia, we also currently developing a new plan for long-term Indonesia economy, and the element of environment is really high in the priority. Because of that, it's impossible to make sure the continuity of the welfare of the people if we fail to catch up. And Korea is, of course, a great partner if we can collaborate on that. If you ask me what specifically we want, I think green economic development, that's what we want. So that's what we want, not just from for now, but also for the future. I know every country has a choice, can choose with who they want to partner. But I think if Korea choose and Indonesia choose to cooperate with each other, there is a lot of things in common that can be done, at least to protect that trajectory of growth in line with the global trend of reducing climate change impact and maximizing what we have right now to make sure the next generation doesn't have to pay for what we are consuming right now, more than what the nature can also absorb. So there's a lot of research on this, and we have in Indonesia the Ministry of National Planning, or we call it Bappenas, that's leading sector on this. They are coming up with a very good formula on this, and I think there is a law being assessed in Indonesia on making this as a mandatory plan for Indonesia's future development. So look at that document when we are trying to conduct bilateral cooperation. It's very important to see the planning first. So it's not too far from the priority of the government. And this document is bottom up, not just top down. So hopefully it can be long lasting, not just limited to the specific term of the government. Lastly, you mentioned about the moving of the capital. Yeah, that discourse has been taking place for quite a long time. It's been in the discussion in Indonesia since the previous government period. And I think the difference right now is that the government currently has a law which has been ratified. It's not ratified, but the parliament has already adopted it. So it's a law in Indonesia to move the capital since last year in February. I think the law has been adopted. So when that law was made, there was a lot of research done before that. Okay, it's based on research considering different factors, economic factors, demographic factors, security as well, and why the choice is this city. Because I remember there were other options, not just the one that is now being used as the location, Nusantara we call it. There are other options. There are plus and minus in each option other than Jakarta. But the need to move the capital city from Jakarta is based on economic consideration, environmental consideration, and security, and also because Jakarta is naturally located in such a low land and there is a threat of environmental degradation. So it's important to reduce the constraint of Jakarta by removing one of the major activities there, which is the central government. So the choice is based on that. But this is not going to be smooth in short time. I mean, if you ask me whether it's more beneficial or costly, it will be costly in the beginning, of course, because like any investment in the beginning is always costly. But hopefully, those who conduct the research in creating this law, they did their professional job very well in estimating that in the long run, this will be the benefit for Indonesia. also the choice of location in the land that's more secure from the from earthquake, from floodings and other environmental challenges. I think it's good because I think one of the aspects that was considered when choosing the new location was how it's safe from like earthquake, tsunami, or something like that. So it's a lot of consideration in choosing the new location. So it will also move the central of economy, not just focused in Java Island, especially in Jakarta, but also more to the eastern part, central part of Indonesia, because Indonesia, as I mentioned, is we have 3 time zones. Indonesia, Jakarta is in the west part, and Kalimantan, the new location is in the central, and then in the Papua and eastern part is another time zone. So it's quite big location. If we move this to the new capital, I think it's good to shift the center of activities as well there. But it's not going to be quick because I know the process of planning has been taking for several years, and I think the process of transferring the staff, the government officials to the new capital will also gradual. But because it's already been set into law in Indonesia, I think it's not going to be something very easy to reconsider, to change. At least it's already law in Indonesia to make it happen. So there will be budget allocated for this. We know there will be some challenges, but we are trying not to. We try to find a solution if there's challenges for that. So I think I hope I cover the questions that you asked. But if you still have some specific that you want me to share my opinion on, I'm available.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Bae and Professor Lee Chung-yeol. Now we move to the Q&A time. So
Okay.
if you have any questions, please raise your hand and the microphone is all yours. So in the Zoom or the Discord, any questions? Or you can send it just, if you are very shy, you can send your message on our chatting chat.
While we are waiting for questions from the floor, I give one or two questions to you. It's quite an interesting presentation, and since you are in charge of the Korean desk in Foreign Affairs, I'd like to ask, while you interact with the Korean personnel from the Korean PFA, what did you find differences, the Korean diplomat and Indonesian diplomats, and did you find any kind of Korean approach to Indonesia or Korean approach to ASEAN? Do you find any kind of shortcomings you want to give advice how we can approach to Southeast Asian, ASEAN, or Indonesia? That is one of my questions. And the other one is, in Indonesian case, you are chair country of ASEAN this year, right? And in Indonesian diplomatic priorities, what is the position of ASEAN? For example, like you have the Indonesia-USA relations, and Indonesia-China relations.
Bilateral.
Bilateral. And you have the involvement in the ASEAN affairs. Where did you put the priority and the places of ASEAN in your diplomatic priorities?
Mm-hmm.
That is my second questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim. Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. These are very interesting questions, especially the first one, because it has more personal assessment. Okay, if you ask me about my assessment on the diplomats from your country and working in Indonesia and interacting with them, I found they are very fast. everything fast. They are contacting me every now and then, not just me, but also the other ministries. When there is an initiative, the diplomats in Jakarta, they are not only liaising with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they are also liaising with the different ministries. And since I think it's quite big number of team that you get in Jakarta, and they are dedicated to several fields, right? For example, similar to our embassy in Seoul, we have the desk that's dealing with the economy, politics, but in bilateral desk, my team is dealing with all of this aspect of cooperation. So we have very broad portfolio, but we have other ministries that we are coordinating. So what I learned from your diplomats, there is quite a few, like to be persistent. I think it's something that's very good, that you keep pushing, and we are trying to do the same. When we have idea, we push back. I think it's for a healthy reason. You know, it's not to be rude or anything, but we know our interest and stick to your interest. That's something that we keep doing. And also regarding yeah, because I happened just to become the LO for President June last year. I think the detail is very detailed. Your diplomacy is very detailed in preparing for anything. It's very detailed, not just taking information as it is, but keeps asking back, you know. And it's helpful because if you ask me, then I have to think about it and I have to prepare for that as well. Because if you just get answer and then okay, and then when something happens during the day that we have to solve, we have to think in advance. That's something that very useful, I think, in interacting with your diplomats in Jakarta. About ASEAN, I think ASEAN has always been considered as the first circle, concentric circle, we call it, like the main concentric of our foreign policy. So perhaps it's not just Indonesia, perhaps other ASEAN countries may have a similar approach to ASEAN, what they see in their foreign policy. But for us, yeah, ASEAN is the main priority for ASEAN. We want to see the stability in the region. The reason is, of course, because with stability, we can focus our resources more for internal development instead of threats from our neighbors, right? We cannot choose the neighbors, but we can create a good environment with them. So yeah, I think different country in ASEAN may have different place on how they place ASEAN in their foreign policy, but Indonesia for sure is put ASEAN in the number one. I hope that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So is there any more questions? And may I give just a final question if there are no one? Okay. So actually our institution is researching, our institution is focusing on a sub-regional area in ASEAN, in the GMS and the PIMPIAGA. Maybe you know about the PIMPIAGA. PIMPIAGA. Yeah. So actually the 2021, the Korea MOPA established the PIMPIAGA and the ROK cooperation fund, and now we just started our cooperations. So actually the PIMPIAGA is a pretty new organization for our researchers too. So for the more progress way to the cooperation between the ROK and the PIMPIAGA, what we should focus on, which part we should focus on, and as a researcher, what should I focusing on the sector?
Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia.
Yes, and the growth is the
the three. Yeah, I think PIMPIAGA is a sub-regional cooperation within ASEAN. That's correct. So even though I'm familiar with this term, I really didn't follow how far it has been going right now, and also cooperation with Korea. I think it's under Korea ASEAN, or it's directly with Korean BMEGA. I want to double check with that. But if you ask me where should I focus, in the past when I was still covering Asia and Pacific Directorate, because it used to be a huge directorate, BMEGA was dealt not by ASEAN but by East Asia and the Pacific Directorate in the ministry. Okay, so there is a team that's working on these specific issues, but because this is now probably already taken care of by my colleagues in the other desk, I have to consult with them as well. Yeah. But there's the Southeast Asia Directorate may be better to give advice on that. Director of Southeast Asia, because these three countries happen to be in the same directorate, that not just under ASEAN but also on the bilateral and regional specifically. So I will be happy to facilitate liaising with my colleagues there to get back with the more definite answer. What can be the focus for cooperation with BMEGA in Korea?
Yeah, because I'm actually planning to visit the BMEGA FC this summer. So if you have give some more information, it would be very helpful for my research.
Okay, I'll take note of that.
And we have one question from our guest. I wonder in what direction Indonesia is trying to approach Myanmar's issue. And the second question is additional. I would like to ask you. Misono is from the embassy in Singapore, and he gave two questions. So second question is, I'd like to ask you for your opinion as an Indonesian diplomat on the ongoing conflict between the human rights issue and the ASEAN principles. So this is I think it's the issue about the Myanmar case.
Yes, okay. With regard to, thank you so much for the question.
Lee Sun-ho.
Oh, this from embassy in
Singapore.
In Singapore. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. You are asking me about the direction Indonesia is trying to approach Myanmar issue. Yes, from the perspective of ASEAN, I think what Indonesia is consistently pursuing is the implementation of the 5 PC consensus that was agreed, and I think right now that is the direction that we are continuing to approach. This is what I understand based on the most recent development as well in the context. So any efforts that's been done, I think it will be always consistent with that. There are of course more recent activities that Indonesia is doing, which I'm not able to elaborate because it's still carrying on, but the idea will be in line with the 5PC. If you're familiar with the 5PC, that's inclusivity is one of the aspects that Indonesia wants to emphasize, inclusivity of the involving those in Myanmar. So that's very important in our strategy and the direction. And also with regard to question number 2 about the ongoing conflict between human rights issues and ASEAN principles. Yes, on non-interference in internal affairs. Yeah, of course, ASEAN has evolved in 2005 when it's created the charter. The aspect of human rights is becoming part of ASEAN's core value, and when we have situations like what we see right now in one of its member countries, Myanmar, of course we want the member country to pay attention to this as well, because that's something that all countries already agreed on charter. So for Indonesia itself, the promotion of human rights is something that we want to promote, but we don't approach this on a single country approach. We want to do it as a value that needs to be pursued as a commitment for all. So if your question specifically is on an ongoing conflict between human rights and ASEAN principle, I think yeah, we really need to address that based on what we already agreed on. So it's something that not intervening per se, because something that's been agreed, right? It's already been agreed when the country is already part of ASEAN. It means it's already agreed to that value and to that principle. So if they don't commit, then they are not agreed. But it's different in my opinion. If you're asking me my opinion, that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
저 뒤에 모아서 제가 채팅창에 올려드릴게요.
Okay, so we have one more question.
Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Here, Changwon, I have questions.
Sure.
I can hear it. Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'm Changwon Yang. I'm the PhD candidate in University of Hawaii. Your presentation was quite interesting, but I would like to give the basic and more the fundamental question about the Indonesia diplomatic skills. So basically, Indonesia is categorized as a middle power country, but historically and practically, Indonesia evaluates and recognized for its ability to shape and lead diplomatic relations with other countries well. So I believe that this is true of achievements such as the Third World Alliance and ASEAN establishment, something like that. So my question is that what do you think Indonesia has been able to achieve this diplomatic leadership as the middle power state? And then the second question is, I think the South Korea and Indonesia look to have a significant the relationship between for economics and diplomatic each other. However, I think it does not seem that there have been any significant achievement yet, I think. So as an expert on Indonesian diplomacy, I would like to know your opinion on what it would take for South Korea to make its concrete diplomatic relations with Indonesia.
The last part, can you just repeat the last bit of the question on the second one? Your second question?
One?
Yeah, just the second one. The first one I got, the second one.
Oh, okay. So my question was that I just want to know your opinions. So how can we make the better relationship between Indonesia and South Korea with your diplomatic perspective?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yang. I'm glad to know that the participants of this discussion comes from many different places, including even Hawaii. Well, what time is it there? Is it
5 p.m.
5 p.m. Wow. Okay. I hope you have enough coffee to follow this. But yeah. You asked me about first about as a middle power, what achievement that Indonesia has achieved diplomatically, and I think if you're asking me the achievements, I think it's not always up to us, you know, to evaluate our own achievements. It's up to others to measure. But something that you can I can say that we are middle income country that has been able to navigate the transition from pre-1998 to now, you know, when there was a huge economic crisis and internal situation in Indonesia, how we democratize Indonesia and transform itself. So internally, I think Indonesia is now much more confident in its diplomatic activities. due to the support from the internal system as well, the situation in Indonesia. And also in the region, as you know, not just in ASEAN, but in the G20, in the UN, when we were a member of the Security Council 2019, and then we member of the Human Rights Council in the UN as well, and also a lot of initiatives that we are proposing, not just as Indonesia, but also as a group. The result is seen in a norm setting of the interactions. And also during the pandemic, COVID-19, we came up as one of the countries that leads the cooperation of how to distribute the vaccines. We know that the dependency is there from one country to another. We cannot just neglect other countries from access to vaccines. At that time, we lead the conversation in the UN and also in the WHO. We were active participation on that. Also, in the humanitarian aspect, we were very active as well in concluding several resolutions in the UN, also in Geneva, 2001, and yeah, there are a number of achievements that can be listed, but something that we feel sometimes the actual benefit is not something you can always measure in terms of numbers, but something that you take in void, you know, in something that the presence of a country can be considered as a good atmosphere. It's what we want to do. I mean, the presence of Indonesia wants to give added value to any existing cooperation. We avoid being passive because we have to be. It's in our national constitution to have active role and to make sure Indonesia stick to its constitution. That's why as a diplomat in our ministry, we were trained to have that understanding of how to look Indonesia from that perspective as well. In articulating our interests abroad, it's really based on that. And then for cooperation between Indonesia and Korea, I think what can we do to improve? Well, I think in the short term, what we can do is make more better understanding, especially to see that Indonesia is trying to change to, as I mentioned in answering the previous question, we want to change the way we are doing our business, not as usual. If Korea can be part of that effort, it's going to be great because it's going to be long-lasting. And the benefit from such cooperation is not just something immediate, but something that can be shown in longer term. But I think that is already carried on. What we have to do is not to be lazy in exploring new opportunities, because sometimes we have other choices, we have other options, but make sure we stick to our long-term interest. That's what I think we can do for now. I think there is another question here in the text, right?
Yes. Thank you so much. We have, I think this will be last question from the Diana Mendoza, and she gave 2 questions. The first question is what past accomplishments of South Korea NSP was incorporated in the Indo-Pacific series, and what board directions does the last rather have that were missing from the NSP? And second question is how are these changes aimed to improving partners' perception of South Korea's hedging posture, the resulting in elevating foreign policy stories and the position in light of the U.S.-China competitions? Why?
Let me read the second question first, okay? Because I think there's.
I think you already gave the second question answer, so maybe we can just give the first question.
You are asking most on the past accomplishment of NSP. What is the accomplishment? Okay, so NSP was under the previous president's initiative, right? And I think if you ask me from the perspective of Indonesia, I think there is increased sense of coherence between the priority of South Korea and the region. So if you want to look at it from the perspective of Indonesia and ASEAN, because Indonesia also proposed the initial ASEAN outlook in the Pacific, and also the NSP has a strong element on the region, on same region. There is some convergence there in terms of priorities, but the accomplishment for Indonesia itself, Indonesia from the NSP, if you ask me what is the, I think it's in terms of cooperation in industrial sector, because we see the potential that NSP, it has several priorities under NSP, and one of them is on the digitalization and industrial cooperation. When I take responsibility of the Korea desk in the ministry, that is something that I learned, that we are benefiting from NSP in terms of having close industrial cooperation. So this is something in line between the priority of Korea and what Indonesia wants to achieve as well in Indonesia. So yeah, I can come up with some concrete numbers, but I think time will 12. But I'm happy to discuss further later.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. And from Myanmar, I'm not sure the pronunciation her name is correct. New Hyun gave some opinion about the Myanmar issue. So she says it's very important issue for the ASEAN certainty in the Indo-Pacific Straits. So I think that ASEAN cooperation should take the action to support the Myanmar people. So I agree also, what?
Yeah, I think this is a good opinion, which I think it's in line. I agree that we need to help people in Myanmar as well. Yeah, no doubt about it.
Okay, thank you so much, all our participants. I think it's been a productive gathering so far, and it seems we have covered everything we need. So now I would like to officially close our today's ASEAN briefing. Thank you so much, all participants and your